So welcome to Lancaster Castle. My name is Balázs. I will be your guide today. So the tour lasts 60 to 75 minutes. I tend to overrun a little bit sometimes. I will do my best not to do that. But as a original profession as English teacher, I like talking. So hence this choice of jobs as well. So few rules at the beginning. So just a few things, pointers, things like that. So this is a castle. A grade 1 listed building, which means we cannot do many alterations. So there might be slippery surfaces and low doors. I will point these out all the time. So if you are on the taller side, I will always say, watch out, that's a low door. So as I said, 60 to 75 minutes is the length of the tour. If you hear the fire alarm, stick with me. Okay, so that, and also it's a general rule, stick with the group all the time. So you can't wander off exploring things. You always have to move with the group. So if you hear the fire alarm, do not panic, do not worry. Just stick with me. I will lead you to the nearest fire exit, and then we'll leave the building. And then we have to wait for the fire brigade to clear us and say, okay, we can go back to the building. Most important thing is, I will talk about death penalty, execution, torture, because they are all connected to the history of the castle, the history of the region. So if you feel uncomfortable with these topics, this is the time for an honorable retreat to the database, a refund of your ticket. But I'm sure you are aware that Lancaster Castle has this history. And what else? Photography. Photography is allowed here in the courtyard in the 2 prisons that we're going to go to. But when we enter the building over there, I will always, before we go, I will repeat this again. So when we enter that building, no more photography is allowed. The reason for that, Lancaster Castle is a working court even today, so even up to this day. 2 courtrooms we are going to see. There's no sessions at the moment, but they can come at any time. So this is a working court, so this building. So it is punishable with 5 years in prison if you take a photo in court.
Wow.
If you want to risk it, it's your and risk somebody reporting you. So that's your business. I'm just saying. So I will talk about the building itself, the history of the castle, just a little bit, and then we'll move on to the male prison first. So, sorry, cough. So Lancaster Castle is 3 things. Okay, first of all, it's a private property. Whose property is this? Where are we now? Majesty is the crown. So the monarch, actually, the reigning monarch, the incumbent monarch. The reason for that is that William IV, at the beginning of the 15th century, was the king who created a sort of portfolio called the Duchy of Lancaster. The Duchy is a collection of properties, mostly land properties in the UK, and this provides the monarch, always the incumbent monarch, with income. Just to give you an idea, it's about £650 million worth today, which means that annually it yields like 22-25 million pounds in passive income. So it is rented out, these things are rented out and so on. Okay, so it's a huge collection of lands, properties. Savoy Estate in London, Lancaster Castle is part of this portfolio. So we are in the home of the king, or yes, the monarch. So we are on private property, actually. And another thing is Lancaster Castle, I mentioned, is a court. So there are 2 working courts, a criminal court and a civil court. We'll talk about this later. And also Lancaster Castle used to be a prison until 2011 when the prisons were shut down. I will talk about this later. So behind me you can see the keep. Let's start with that building, which is behind the scaffolding. Unfortunately, until about the end of August, we hope. But it's just a hope. We don't know when they are going to finish. So the keep is always the strongest part of the castle. So that's where people retreat in the event of a siege or an attack on the castle. This keep has 3 meters thick walls, very difficult to breach, possibly impossible, most likely practically impossible. You can actually blow up from on the ground if you dig a tunnel. It takes a long time, takes a lot of effort. it's possible, but to breach it from outside, practically, it's in vain. So you can't do that. The keep was built actually. There were two ideas. So there was one idea that was built by the Normans originally. We know today it's not true. So the Normans came here AD 70. No, that was Romans. So the Romans came here AD 79. So they were the first ones who built a fortress, possibly at the place where the keep is. So they were the very first one building a stone building, so creating a stone fortress. After them, it was the Normans after 1066, so the Norman invasion, the last successful invasion of Britain. So the Normans arrived here at 1097, 1096. They were the first ones after the Roman Empire to build here a fortress, but they built a wooden structure. The Norman army that generally moved fast, so they didn't really have time to build a stone castle like this. They operated with wooden structures, so they tried to do it as fast as possible. Still, for quite some time, historians believe that this was built by the Normans. Today we know it's not true. And the reason for believing this was that this is a split keep, which means that in the middle there is a wall to make it even stronger against any type of breach. And the Tower of London in London has a similar keep. That's why the idea was that it might be built by the Normans. Actually, today we know this was middle of the 12th century by King David I. So this is a Scottish keep, Scottish design, very similar to Carlisle. On the top you can see just one very concrete addition. The battlements on the top that you can see, just a part of it, they were added in 1585 during the reign of Elizabeth I. So she was concerned about a possible Spanish invasion, which didn't materialize in the end, but that's when the top was done and the battlements were added. So we cannot enter the keep until the renovations are done, so that's what we can see for the moment. If you turn to that there, the gatehouse. So the gatehouse is called John of Gaunt's gatehouse. John of Gaunt was the Duke of Lancaster. He died in 1399, so end of the 14th century. He was an incredibly wealthy, influential person in British life, in British politics, in Britain at the time, in England at the time, I should say. His net worth at the time was about 1 billion pounds. Sorry, 100 billion pounds, not 100 billion pounds. So in today's money, it would be about 100 billion pounds. So younger generations like half Elon Musk would say. Nothing shows his influence more that his son William IV became the first king out of the house of Lancaster. And it was really, so for a long time, for example, until the Victorian age, it is called John of Gaunt's gatehouse. So people and historians believe that this was built by John of Gaunt. No, it wasn't actually. This was built by his son William IV around 1405. So John of Gaunt dies in 1399. So it can't have been built by him, but it was built by the son, honoring the father. But when you are coming inside or you're going outside on the left-hand side, there's still a John of Gaunt statue, which was put there by the Victorians in 1822 because they still believe that this was built by him. So castles in general tend to be rebuilt from time to time as they are attacked and damaged and so on. But, and I will give you an example for that. But the wall originally, so the wall that you can see, the first time it was built, and some of the towers, was 1210 by 2. It's a key idea. If you look just to the left of the gatehouse, there's this narrow section that you can see the pipe of the there is this section there, which is this pink color bricks. So that's still the original King John wall from 1210. So that hasn't been taken away. The rest of the wall here is either from the 14th century, so 1325 actually. That's when the Witch's Tower or the Brass Tower was built as well. Because in 1322, Robert, the previously Scottish king, came here to have a little bit of a scavenge, so tried to attack the castle, damage the walls, and it had to be rebuilt. This wall had to be rebuilt, and that's when that tower was built, the Witch's Tower and the Wales Tower. Some towers, later parts of the wall, are Georgian, much later. Speaking of the Witch's Tower or the Wales Tower, so that tower over there is called the Wales Tower because at the bottom there were freshwater there. This is where the castle got deep water from. Okay? And so if you have a siege, of course, and you bring the military, you can go 2 days, maybe 3, but after that people start dying of thirst, so it's not really a good thing not to have water. And also called the Witch's Tower because in 1612 the Pendle witches, some of them actually, were held in the dungeon waiting for the trials. I will talk about them in the courtroom, in the criminal court later. And I mentioned the last time when these walls were damaged quite seriously was actually after the Civil War, so 1650s, when Charles II was really concerned about people using castles as a sort of basis for another rebellion. So he remembered his father's fate. Charles I was beheaded by the barbarians. So he ordered, so Charles II, after the Civil War, when the monarchy was restored, he ordered the castle walls, not just here, but many castles around the UK at the time, he ordered them to be slighted, meaning you had to intentionally demolish some parts of the walls. Not everything, but just gaps. Very silly idea. Why? Because Lancaster Castle was already a working court and was a working prison. Can you have a prison with holes in it? You can, but people will escape. So very quickly they realized it was a silly idea. They just rebuilt it. Speaking of prisons, let's go to the male prison first. So that way, just
so this is
So this was the most modern prison that we have here in the castle, and this was the male prison. So this is Victorian, 1871. So as I said, this was built, this is the last, or the latest version, let's say, because there are other prisons that are more older, of course. So you can see there are 3 floors. There's a huge window on the ceiling, so on the roof. There are 2 reasons for that. Victorians believe that if prisoners come in contact with sunlight, it will cleanse their soul, they will stop doing criminal things. I have my doubts, but that's what they believe. And also a practical reason, if you have a huge roof windows on top of the building, you have to spend less on kind of candles, lights, things like this. It's a practical cost-saving sort of measure that they. And this prison, as you can see, this layout of prisons. So this is how it looks. It's basically a template of all prisons in the British Empire. So when you go, this is what you will most likely On the second floor and the third floor today, there is a police museum, which is free to enter on Thursday and Friday. So you just missed it for this week, but next week, if you are here, you can come in. And the door is open. You can just walk in and take about an hour or so. It takes about an hour to walk around and just see the police museum. There are ex-police officers as volunteers who are there and answer your questions. And the reason for this police museum is that between World War I and 1937, there was a police training academy in the castle. So police recruits were trained here to prepare for the police officer's job, and actually they were housed in the cells, so they lived here. Okay? So altogether, 40 cells are here on these 3 levels. They are designed for 80 people, so 2 people each cell. However, there used to be lots of overcrowding, so I have like over 200 people I have heard the biggest number was, so it's fairly overcrowded. A few weeks ago, I had a lady on the tour who actually worked here as a probation officer before the prison was closed down, and in that office just on the first floor. And she said it was practically impossible to talk to anybody in the offices because there was a lot of shouting and lots of overcrowding, and people shouted up and down and moving around. It's a very, very noisy environment, right? The better behaved you were, the higher up you were. So the most sort of best behaved people, best behaved prisoners were on the top floor, and they were able to see outside. So that was their reward for being well behaved. If you were not so well behaved, then you were behind those railings. So in that probably isolation cells in a very dark place. So that's where you were allocated if you were causing problems. One very famous case that involved this prison was the 1975 Birmingham Six. If you remember reading about them or heard about them, 6 Irishmen were accused of a terror plot in Birmingham, so detonating a bomb. They had nothing to do with it, practically. But because in Birmingham they wouldn't have had a fair trial, so the whole trial was moved here to Lancaster. And the 6 people were actually kept on this floor here in these cells. There's behind you. The whole prison was evacuated, so nobody else was here, and huge security measures were applied. And the trial was also here. We are going to go into the courtroom where they were tried. They were convicted. They spent 16 years in prison and were released in 1992, if I remember correctly the year. So this was one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in British legal history. So they had nothing to do. They were just at the wrong place at the wrong time, and the police thought that they were the ones who did it, but they weren't. So the prison closed down in March 2011 for financial reasons, mostly. So imagine this building, imagine the heating bills. Even today, so it's middle of June, right? I'm still carrying my coat. You will see the text on why. So still like chilly, coldish. Imagine this in January or in winter in general. So the heating bills were enormous, and also the prison was too small and outdated. So in March 2011, this was closed down, and also the female penitentiary, which we're going to go to, that was also closed down. So the whole prison function of this building ceased to exist. So take a look around, just let's say 1 or 2 minutes, and then we'll go on to the female penitentiary. We can take photos in here, so
And that one's not.
Yeah, that's normal.
Sorry.
Okay, when you're ready, let's move on to the female prism, please. So that will cross the courtyard to the other side.
It's funny that you say that's great stuff. I never find that much now. I'd like to make something like this. What was the else?
Great. With chili inside. So that way you can sell. They're confused. No. Okay, so if you just go this way, instead of the production, there is okay, so this was the female prism for most of its history, not always, but most of its history. So it was built in 1821, started functioning in about 1824. So this is about 50 years earlier than the previous one, so this is older, actually much older. And this was an experiment. So this is called a panopticon prism. Panopticon means I see and I know everything. It comes from Latin. So at the time, the British didn't have really much experience in building prisons. Okay, so how to create prisons, how to build proper prisons like the other one that we just saw. So this was an experiment, this was an idea. The person who came up with this was called Jeremy Bentham, and he designed this layout that you can see. So if you look around, this is a semicircle, right? So it's not rectangular. And the reason, the idea behind that was, on one hand, to save on costs. So cost cutting was always an issue, let's say it this way. So the idea was that one guard would be enough for one, so there are 5 floors, one guard would be enough for 1 floor. So one guard would be able to control the whole floor. And from the guard's booth was somewhere here where the stairs start. And so he was able to look into, because of the semicircle arrangements and layout, was able to look into all cells at all times. So there was 24/7 surveillance on the part of the guard to the prisoners, and 0 privacy for the prisoners. Very disturbing, very stressful situation. So one guard was enough for 1 floor. And the other idea for a female prison was that before, a very important date is 1774, where there were 2 acts of parliament by the British Parliament, which were basically prison reform. Okay? So they were accepted on the recommendations of John Howard, who was a prison researcher who traveled the UK and also traveled Europe, and just simply researched conditions and studied how to make prison conditions better and reduce costs, things like that. So before 1774, men, women, and children were not separated. They were all together. Also, they were not separated according to crimes. Everybody was in the same place. So a child, and when I say children, this is very important. So anybody over the age of 9. So a 10-year-old was treated as an adult legally. 12-year-olds. So, and this will be important later. I will talk about this in the main building as well. So they could be together with adult men, adult women. They could be together with stealing a piece of cheese. They went to prison. They could be together with a man who was a serial killer, somebody very serious criminal. But after, so in 70s, and these created very unfavorable conditions. Let's say it this way. From a moral perspective and also from a security perspective. In a moral perspective, so if you just think about it, men, women in a closed space for a long period of time, what will happen? Babies will happen. Okay? And babies were in prisons very unwelcoming, let's say, let's put it this way, because you couldn't keep them in prisons, it's not possible. So they had to be taken out of the prison into most likely to orphanages, which were a cost factor. So you have to feed the babies, you have to clothe them, you have to provide accommodation. So these were all costs to the state, right? So to the authorities. And there was also a security concern, because at the time, the idea was that women were very easy to control. So you would need 1 guard for the floor. Suffragettes might disagree with that, but still, that was the idea. So the idea was, okay, let's separate men and women, because we can focus more resources on the males, on the men, so more guards, simply more stuff. And for the female prisons, you need 1 guard on 1 floor, and you need this type of arrangement to be able to control that. And one more thing about the layout. So the idea was also behind, it's not just the cost, but the idea was also, if you feel watched all the time, right? So how do you behave when you know there's a CCTV camera? We all behave differently when we know we are not being watched. So the idea was, if you know that you are being watched all the time, or at least you can assume, because the people in the prison cell, they never knew when the prison guard was actually looking at that cell. But then you would regulate your own behavior, so you would behave differently. Which is true in many ways. In other ways, it caused problems, because people simply have records of prisoners going mad, crazy. So the medical bills for the prison went up. So what they saved on the guard salary, they had to spend on medical bills. So it didn't really work out. So for the first few years, this is how the prison worked, and then they started putting doors on the cells, because the first few years there were only railings, there were only those rails that you can see. There were no doors at all. So this was 24-hour surveillance all the time without any privacy. So between 1821, so I said most of its history was a female prison. So until World War One, this was a female prison. In World War I, they started putting German prisoners over here. Okay, so either German soldiers or German nationals who were interned because of their nationality. Similar thing happened to the Japanese in America during the Second World War. So they were interned because they were Japanese nationals. They had fear of spying or some connection to the motherland. And there was a very famous prisoner actually. Here, if I say the word Pilates, let's ring the bell, exercise, yeah? So Joseph Pilates is a German national who was living in the UK at the time, and during the First World War, for 4 years, he was in this prison. And he was probably working on his method. So what else would you be doing in the science? So Lancaster Castle possibly contributed to the Pilates. So most likely. During the Second World War, the building was used as a observatory, so from the top you could watch the skies for enemy airplanes. It wasn't much used as a prison. Many men died, so it wasn't really used as a prison. And after World War II, it became also a male prison until 2011, when it was also closed down with the male prison that we just been to. So for most of its history, this was a female prison. This was actually the lunch counter that you can see here. So when prisoners had lunchtime, dinner time, so any meals of the day, they had to come here and pick up the food on this counter and to actually come. So I mentioned in the previous room, when with his mother immediately called the police, because she would have been an accomplice if she had. So she called the police, told him where he was captured. So this was the last successful escape attempt from here. So please take a look at that cell, and then we'll go on to the main building. The cells are also called coffin cells because you have the feeling of being in a coffin. So you can take a look inside, very, very old glass places. Imagine this place again and meet the hospital. Yeah. Okay, so when you're ready, let's go on to the so down the stairs and to the left towards the corridor that I pointed out earlier. Down the stairs and to the left.
여기서 뭐 절수 공룡이 도망가는 공룡은
Yeah, it's was. So the cleaning this episode is considered cleaning the exercise. The diving pool over there. So Okay, so this is the point where you need to stop photography. Okay, so from once we are inside, we can. Okay, so let's go inside.